Welcome to your midday update from the Government Information Service National Television Network. I'm Ryan O'Brien. And with us today is the Director of Youth Development, the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, Mr. Benson Emile. And to his immediate left is the Director of Youth, Ms. Mary Wilfred. And to her direct left is Mr. Patrick Matre, the Director of Sports. On our program today, we are going to be looking at recent functionings of the ministry, especially with the advent of COVID-19 and some of the policies that the ministry has put in place to ensure the continuation of the work at the ministry. First of all, we'll ask Mr. Emile to give us an overview as to what has been happening vis-a-vis the workings of the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports since the advent of COVID-19. Welcome, Mr. Emile.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien, for having me and inviting the ministry to your program. As it relates more specifically to COVID-19, as a ministry, we were right in the middle of our annual program, prior to COVID-19, reaching us in St. Lucia. So as a result, our programming has been significantly interrupted, especially given, what our mandate is, which is to facilitate, the development, of sports on the island, and to create this enabling environment for our young people to participate, in national development. And with that comes a lot of, direct interaction with individuals, with groups, with athletes, and so on. And given the protocols of COVID-19, a lot of our programming was hindered as a result. Like all other agencies of government, we were required to observe, what was the protocols that were established, by the Ministry of Health, more specifically the CMO's office. And as a result, even administratively, inside of the office itself, we experience, that, kind of disturbance whereby, like all other agencies, were required, to close, not necessarily close, but to reduce on the scale of our operations for a while. And gradually, in keeping with, the updates on the protocols, gradually reintegrate persons, on the administrative side. On the sports side, we still cannot operate fully as a result of COVID-19 because, sports requires, there are a lot of sports that require, direct contact, direct interaction. And the protocol as it is now does not permit, for more than 6 persons to engage in, training or sporting activities and so on. And as a result, our school sports, had to be canceled this year. And, our coaching program, which is the interaction of the ministry, in schools, to deliver coaching services. This has been, not necessarily canceled, but we had to cease from that kind of activity because it is not in keeping, with what is required to retard, the spread of COVID-19. On the youth side, we were affected greatly too, because again, most of our programming for youth involves, meeting groups, meeting clubs, interacting with them, and that kind of activity assists as well. Although we have been innovative and trying as much as possible, to use a virtual platform and the technology, which Ms. Wilfred will later elaborate on. It is still not operating as normal. But as much as possible, we're trying to, as much as possible, reach out to those clubs and reach out to those individuals, so that the programming of the ministry can continue, be it in a virtual environment. I must say, what this has done to is as much as possible, present new possibilities of reaching out, to our audience. And though it is one that we experimented with during COVID-19. We more or less recognizing that it's a platform that would need to continue to use, to reach out, especially to our young persons.
Thank you very much,
Yes.
P.S. Emile, and we've certainly seen that you've had your challenges, but it's good to know that you were still able to continue with your programming at a particular level. So you did mention some of the challenges. So first of all, we'll invite the Director of Youth, Mr. Wilfred, to tell us about some of those challenges, how well the ministry were able to meet those challenges, and what have been some of the new strategies that were adopted.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. One of the challenges we had during the COVID-19 is the cancellation of Youth Month activities. Every year, Youth Month is celebrated in April, and that was at the height of the quarantine and staying home and just being locked up. And so we were unable to deliver a lot of our events, the major one being the Youth Awards, which would have been held the 28th, I believe, of April. Also, we had Global Youth, or we had Youth Service Week. This is the week where clubs, organizations, and informal groups of young people would do good, do well. And we also we had planned a major launch at the Philip Massner grounds. And in between, you have the Wayne Louis Memorial Lecture and some other events taking place. So that was, all of those events were covered in just one message by our minister, Minister Edmond Estefan, who gave the message to inform young people and other stakeholders that we won't be able to host these events for Youth Month in April as planned. And so we in spite of not being able to do that, one of the gestures that we came up with was the delivery of masks to young people primarily, and to other organizations that needed it at that time. We're pleased to inform the public that we have delivered over 40,000 disposable masks, and that was our way of saying, even though Youth Month, the activities did not take place, but we want to remain, we want to be a part of the mitigation of COVID-19. And so our youth workers, youth officers, they did the delivery, and it was well received by groups, organizations, and individuals.
Okay, Mr. Fred, a good overview of some of the things that you're able to do. We'll get back to some of the actual implementation of some of the initiatives that the ministry took on within that period. But first of all, we'll go across to the Director of Sports, Mr. Patrick Matcha. We know that sports is very much an integral part of the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, and knowing that both youth and the general public involved in sports. So we're covering veterans, retirees, active clubs, registered clubs, youth, schools, and the like. So Mr. Matcha, we know that it has been a time where you've been really having to sort out what direction you were going based on the situation that the country was facing. Tell us of some of the initiatives that you were actually able to implement.
Thank you very much, Ryan, and good afternoon to all. As you rightly said, it was in a sense of heart-wrenching to be staying home as sports personalities, individuals who are always outdoors and taking it all in. And so we had to find a very creative way as a ministry to come up to engage persons, because we feared the worst if persons were locked up and not able to get actively involved. And so one of the strategies we used was to reach them virtually, as was done with the youth aspect. And so we called on our coaches, we did a few brainstorming sessions, and we recognized, hey, let us look at a virtual platform. And so we came up with those videos where persons will engage themselves with. And so we looked at a number of sports, and the sports we chose were basically the sports which we have the coaches within the ministry. And what we did was to put out video sessions where persons would engage themselves at home in the confines of their home and to do a few basic exercises to understand the sport better, and more so to be encouraged that once this thing is over, whenever that is, that they would have fell in love with a particular sport if they are not already in love with one, because it's a difficult thing to say that one does not play sport. I think everybody is involved in it. And so those videos were just to get you going in terms of what you're doing. Get out of your own zone at home. Get physically active, because we're also very worried that just as it's a health issue, and being in one place is also a health issue. So those videos were to sensitize persons as to what to do within the home setting, within the various sporting activities. And as the PS would have indicated before, the success of these videos, as you would see, they're broadcast on YouTube and another forum, that this will allow us to capture a new brand of persons, a new set of, a new audience, and we will build on it as we move into the new normal, so to speak. But that is one of the major initiatives that we had, and of course the discussions that we've been having in different forums in terms of how does sport affect you as an individual.
Certainly. Mr. Pierce, I want to get back to you a bit, because we know that the public know that the ministry is gradually reopened. There's a lot of interaction with the public, and all the different ministries and government departments will have their protocols in place in the entire population. So tell us what is in place at the ministry for persons wanting to interact with the ministry, probably come in to find out what's happening vis-a-vis reopening of certain events. How can they get back involved in terms of a youth group registration, matters like that. We can take us from, like, even when you enter the main door, some of the protocols are in place to accommodate the public.
Well, like all the agencies of government, we're guided by the recommendations, and even instructions of the CMO. And upon the gradual, normalizing of activity, we are required to put certain things in place. As you enter the main entrance, for one, the main entrance remains open. And what it does, it more or less mitigates or reduces, the amount of, contact, persons would make with that door, and as a result, serving as a transmission agent. At the entrance as well, we have placed an individual, would provide you with, sanitization of hands, provide sanitization of hands, and would ensure that you're wearing a mask when you enter the facility. We have, cleaning personnel, on staff full time, and what they're required to do is to sanitize, the common, surfaces, and places like your washrooms and so on, the common spaces. They're required to sanitize those areas. We've also looked at, our space, and in accordance with, the distancing protocols, to ensure that, we do not have too many persons, converging in one area at any given time. We have reduced, our meetings are generally virtual, and as much as possible, we do not allow too many people to converge, in one space, and not observing, the distancing protocols. So all of those things we have in place to ensure that our services, to our administrative services to the general public continues. As it relates to, especially the sports side where you have facilities and so on, we have been in discussion with personnel from the CMO's office. And what we're doing is, putting standard protocols in place, for different sporting activities. We've had that interaction with the CMO's office, and we had a point where we have agreed what those general protocols are. And it speaks to the sport itself, it speaks to the venue where the sport is being held, and all of the protocols that needs to be established, in keeping with, the national plan. That is fairly advanced, And for some of the facilities, we have already communicated what it is, especially the Darren Sammy Cricket facility, the Darren Sammy Cricket Ground, and so on. And as we go on, you know, as all the agencies make that request, we want to be available to lend guidance according to, you know, what is put out by the CMO's office.
Thank you, Mr. Permanent Secretary. Mr. Benson Emile, I'll be reminding you that you're on to the midday update being brought to you live on the National Television Network. We'll be back after this break.
Coronavirus? I am worried, Gassa. It's only old people dying from that.
Hold up. Being young does not mean being safe. Yes, it's true that the elderly are at higher risk, but anyone can get the virus. The effect is even worse if you have a chronic condition like hypertension, heart disease, lung disease, and diabetes, or weakness in your immune system. If you are living with these conditions, be extra careful. Wash your hands with soap and water. Use hand sanitizer with at least 60% alcohol when hand washing is not possible. Avoid touching your face. Take steps to boost your immunity through proper nutrition, exercise, rest, and take your medication as prescribed. Limit being around people who have flu symptoms, even close family members.
Our health is in our hands. Together, through simple actions, we can stop the spread of coronavirus. This message was brought to you by the Bureau of Health Education of the Ministry of Health and Wellness.
We're happy that you're able to stay with us, and we'll be continuing our discussion with officials from the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports. We have with us in studio the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Benson Emile, the Director of Youth Development, Ms. Mary Wilfred, and the Director of Sports, Mr. Patrick Matcha. Ms. Wilfred, we know that you mentioned earlier that there was this untimely break in your activities, particularly around Youth Month, but you know that in collaboration with the National Youth Council, which has really come on board over the last couple of years in delivering Youth Month, both the ministry and the NYC did continue with some of those plans to get some of those programs delivered, maybe not in a traditional manner, but virtually. We know 1758 Youth Connect has been really a success. Can you tell us a bit more about that initiative?
Okay, 758 Youth Connect was conceptualized to engage young people during this time of shutdown, and since we were unable to meet them in the physical spaces that we did before, we felt that that would be a platform where we can engage young people. And so there are a couple components. The first one is a series of webinars that we are providing for young people. And these webinars can be hosted by the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, or they can be hosted by a youth organization that wants to use our Zoom platform to reach their own young people. So far, we've had a couple of webinars. The first one, we've engaged young people in how are you doing during this time of shutdown? How are you keeping during COVID-19? And so it was a place where they spoke and sort of told us what was going on with them. The second one, the National Students Council put up a webinar on from the classroom to the living room, how in quick time they now confined to their space at home to learn and to prepare for exams. And that session went really well. We had the Chief Education Officer, Mrs. Fiona Meyer, with us, and that guided us quite well in terms of CXC, what are the plans, reopening school, and what have you. And we now move into mental health, because we recognize COVID is taking a mental toll on our young people. There's a lot of anxiety among young people. Exams have changed, exams have shifted. You're now writing CXC in August, you know, when you're supposed to be liming and maybe traveling with your family and all of these things. So we've looked at that, and even on Wednesday, part of the series would be on masking suicide, because we believe that, you know, young people are internalizing a lot of what is going on. they're not speaking it out, but when when you meet them one-on-one, it's taking an emotional and a mental toll on them. So that's part of what we're doing, giving a platform where we can discuss and speak about those issues. But in addition to that, the ministry as a COVID-19 response is now providing psychosocial support for young persons. So we're not only talking about it, but you can connect with your youth worker, and your youth worker will give you access where a psychotherapist will help you out, well, virtually, of course, to deal with some of the issues you may be facing. And the third component is that we want to have a sort of Jeopardy trivia on St. Lucia, where you can, actually go to a website and you can play games and against other young people, and that one is not developed as yet. But the webinar series, what it has done is to reach young people not only in St. Lucia, but throughout the Caribbean and across the world as well. So if you are a St. Lucian young person, you're say in the UK or in Australia or wherever you are, you can connect with us on Facebook, Ministry of Youth and Sports St. Lucia, and be a part of it, because we believe all our young people are able to engage each other so that we can, better develop our nation. And there are some good ideas coming from the chat rooms in these webinar series. As well, it was a point of meeting those other persons that we worked with, for example, NYC. We can still speak on matters that affect youth developments in the virtual space. So our conversations and our dialogue did not stop because of COVID. We simply used the platform, reverted to it, and we're now looking at how we can be more actionable in the way forward so that we can deliver the services that young people so desire from us.
Very good, Ms. Winfred. And there was a part of your presentation that you did mention that caught my attention as well, because that young people, a lot of them gravitate towards the social media aspect of life. And you did mention there was a lot of good ideas coming out of the chat. So my question to you now is, what was some of this feedback coming from the chat and young persons, and maybe an indication how wide was the reach, and was it something that you got recommendations that is a way that we need to continue in the future?
Yes, I think our PS can attest to that, and even our director, they're always part of the platform, kind of serving as an administration monitoring, because what happens is that during the webinars, young people would be writing questions and giving suggestions. And I think the provision of the services is one, that we not only come in and speak about mental health, but here I can actually get a service. I can actually access a psychotherapist during this time, which is made available by the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports. Also, we can see synergies in what St. Lucia is doing and what other countries are doing. 2 weeks ago, the CARICOM, the deputy program manager for CARICOM in Guyana, was on with a mental health webinar. And so we were connected to young people in Suriname, in Jamaica, Trinidad, St. Vincent. So we also receiving feedback from young people, not only in St. Lucia, but in other Caribbean islands. And we're hoping to take in that feedback and make the program even better, so that it continues to improve, to deliver the best we can for young people, not only in St. Lucia, but across the region and in the world. Because once it's on social media, you can access the platform, you can go through Zoom or Facebook Live, and you can be a part of it. So young people are connected, even though they can't meet physically for meetings and seminars and what have you.
Thank you, Ms. Winfred. Yeah. Mr. Matre, we know that the sportsmen and women are itching for this physical activity that you said would have been lacking under the lockdown and the restrictions in terms of preventing the spread of COVID-19. But as with the gradual reopening, persons are already inquiring as to how they can resuscitate their own activities within the various sporting disciplines, how they can use facilities, and we know that the ministry has the sort of protocols that will be needed to be established to allow that to happen. Tell us of what the demands are like, and what are some of the protocols that are going to be in place for gradual recommencement of sporting activity within the infrastructure of the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports.
You see, first of all, Ryan, in terms of the protocols, a lot of them you have general protocols which have to be observed. And like the PS had indicated earlier, a lot of those general protocols will be for all the sport. But again, sport by sport, you need to be specific. And for instance, you would have heard that the ICC, for example, had indicated that a critical part of the game where saliva was rubbed on the ball to ensure that there was swing, that they would no longer allow those things. And so tennis, for example, the International Tennis Federation has indicated that if you are playing tennis, that you should have 2 sets of numbered balls, number 1, number 2, or whatever it is, and that you only pick up your number 1 balls and the number 2. So for every sport, there would be specific protocols, but generally the protocols would be the same as you would have normally, that you ensure that you wash your hands. If you have flu-like symptoms, you do not go to the venue. And so generally those are the kind of things that we're seeing. And as you said, as we starting off, for instance, the Cricket Association has they're first off the blocks, so to speak, and they would be having soon a 10-10 competition where teams from around the island will be coming, gather at one single venue, because you see, one issue is to have the sport being played, but also the venue. So if you have, for example, Darren Sami Cricket Ground, which will be the venue, that venue will be managed, so you'll sanitize the venue and ensure that all the protocols are done within that particular venue. Our challenge as a ministry would be, as we get more and more into sports, is how do you control what happens at the open venues? And I dare say that challenge would come with a lot of sensitization, publicity, because if you're in a community, how do you say to persons, do not go into the field and play? Because you want the health aspect, but you also want persons to in a sense, be safe. So it's an issue that we're still looking at. A lot has to do, as I said, with sport specific, but again, you have contact, non-contact sports, open venues, closed venues.
Okay, we are due for another recess on our program. We'll be back in a short while.
Sanitizer, better yet, use soap and water.
We must protect each other if we are to beat this corona.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. Be a soldier, together we can beat this corona.
So you don't become the next case. Avoid touching your face. I'm sure you've been told so. Handshakes and hugging her up, no.
Advice, give you the please. Cover your mouth and your nose if you cough or sneeze.
Practice social distancing and avoid large social gatherings.
Together let us win this war. Be a soldier for St. Lucia. Together let us win this war. St. Lucia, be a soldier. Together we can beat this corona.
For further information, please contact the hotline at 311 or the Bureau of Health Education at 468-5349.
We're happy to have you with us once more. We'll continue with Mr. Matre on the whole aspect of the recommencement of sporting activity in St. Lucia. And Mr. Matre, we did speak about some of the protocols and what certain associations have already been doing, but we know a very vital aspect of sport, not just St. Lucia, but internationally, is the involvement of spectators and persons wanting to come in. What would be the expectation for the person out there who wants to, virtually and physically be there and to really be part of the experience, what can we say to them?
First of all, Ryan, as anything else, we first of all have to look at the closed venues, and that's a place we could control. And so in terms of social distancing, that has to obtain. And of course, the numbers will go down drastically in terms of the spectatorship. It raises for us a good opportunity in terms of a virtual platform and viewership, and that's why we need to step in terms of trying to air those games live, so that persons will be able to see and persons will be able to participate. It opens a whole new world of fantasy gaming, where you have fantasy football, fantasy cricket, but then it's a whole new aspect. As I indicated before, our issue would be really at the community grounds, because the community grounds are really for the community. And how do you police that? The best way that you have to police is level of sensitization, and to cause persons who are coming to the field, one, to be responsible enough to know that, one, if you have flu-like symptoms, you stay home. Two, that when you get to the field, that you are your brother's keeper. And so you need to do things to ensure that your brother or your sister, for that instance, is safe on the field of play. So it really is a learning curve for all of us, but I think that we'll get there generally, because persons want to come out. Like I said, once you have been in, the solution for you is to come out and play a sport.
Okay, just one more follow-up on that aspect. If, for instance, a national association wants to stage a competition, what are the guidelines for them? Do they, first of all, approach the Chief Medical Officer, Ministry of Health, or do they go through that process through the ministry?
It's a combination of both, because we have already established the general protocols and guidelines with the Ministry of Health, and we do have them. During the course of this week, they'll be going out to everybody, because like I said, it's really about sensitization. So they will be going out to everybody, and for now, we're saying to you, we are looking at the non-contact sports, because they're easier in terms of how they implement them. And so our advice would be, before you go out and organize any competition or any tournament of that nature, to contact the Ministry of Sports, who will point you in the correct direction.
Okay. Mr. P.S., it's been challenging, you said so from the start, and you as the Permanent Secretary having to manage both the aspect of the programming for youth development and sports, the environment in which you operate, first that we find ourselves in currently with COVID-19 and the virtual aspect of programming, and having to reach your mandate of facilitating youth development and sports in St. Lucia. That would certainly present its own challenges. How have you been able to manage that, bearing in mind we're in a virtual situation, and knowing that generally at some point we'll have to go back to what would have been the traditional aspect? How much has that been able to really, were you able to manage that manifestation?
Yeah, well, it is one of adapting. Yeah, now that we're, whatever challenge is presented to us in the delivery of our programs, we have to learn to adjust, and to adapt, and to not allow the programming to be significantly hindered. Mm-hmm. And moving into the virtual environment with youth proved very successful. Though we could not have, gone ahead with the events, but we were still able to reach out to our young people and to have dialogue and to have conversation, and also to get, their input into their own experience, of what is happening, and for us to be able to make those adjustments that are necessary. What is in moving forward? What this period, of lull, if I want to put it that way, is providing us. It is giving us an opportunity, to plan for when, the country normalizes and sports and youth events, normalizes and so on. So there are a few major events that we put on that we need to sit, and revisit and plan to ensure that when the country opens fully and, they're going to be delivered, that we've made some significant improvements in terms of, our delivery. Some of it, school sports is one that I can speak out more or less. That is more or less cancelled for this year. But come next year, we're hoping, to be able to deliver, a sports package in schools, that meets the objectives as set, by the ministry and so on. Prior to coming here, we were just at a virtual meeting with the other OCS, the other territories here, Windward Island territories, regarding, the school sports event that is put up, annually and so on. And we have agreed to cancel, but we have also agreed to sit and revisit, the event itself with the aim of improving it and allowing it to fulfill the objectives that we set, in this modern day, for sports. So it is not one, the environment in the office is not one that is on pause, but it is trying to find creative ways to continue to engage and using the time, to plan for the events and the programs that we're expected to put up when the country normalizes.
Yes, definitely. Yes. And it's very happy that you did speak on the Windward Island School Games, because some persons have been actually inquiring. So that's the first official announcement coming from the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, Mr. Benson Emile. Ms. Wilfred, looking back at your own aspect of youth development, and the Ministry of Education is one ministry that we work very closely with, not just now, but from times over years. And social transformation at one time, even a couple of years under this administration, we were aligned in social transformation. That would have been another ministry. And one of the other initiatives, apart from the school sports, now we know that we have a music program going on. You have a youth development assistant who is also doing some work in regard to linking the schools activities and the ministries, particularly the development of the youth. And we know about the musical program. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Because they're undertaking a virtual presentation as well from some of the schools on the island.
Okay. A component of the 758 Youth Connect, the virtual platform, is also a space for performing arts, poetry, music, painting, and that is part of it. But it's going to be sort of rolled out in phases. So for now, we are planning a virtual concert that's with Mrs. Shelley-Ann Cyril, and she's doing that in collaboration with the Ministry of Education. I know that students have sent in their videos, soloists, duets, groups, instrumental pieces. That has been sent to her, and we're now trying to package it so that we can put it on the platform that young people would be able to see what they've done, and it can be viewed by everybody in St. Lucia, in and out of St. Lucia. So that's one of the areas in which we are reaching out to young people as well. So it's not just the dialogue and the conversations, but also that component is tapped into. And we hope that within the next week or two, we should be able to have that virtual concerts in collaboration with the Ministry of Education.
Yes, I know that a lot of headway has been made on it, and maybe within the next week we can have them being rolled out alongside some of the sporting videos that have been going out from the coaches from the ministry. Mr. Matre, the Permanent Secretary did speak about Windward Island School Games, and I know that you have a lot of experience in the running of that, and Winlot would have been one of the main persons behind it over the years. We know that the 4 islands would have had to come together to make a decision. I know it would have taken some thought, and it would have put a lot of concerns from the individual islands. How much of a disappointment is it? We know, well, there's nothing really you can do about it, but I know that the student athletes from the 4 islands really look forward to it. And St. Lucia going forward, what are we hoping that we can, learn from the situation going forward in Windward Island School Games, the annual event?
Well, Ryan, the same thing as we understand what the situation is, and we also we look forward with optimism in terms of what's happening. What I could say to you is, at the end of this period, due to the fact that the games have been cancelled, we know that St. Lucia will be the 2-year defending champion. So we'll be defending for 2 consecutive years, and for me that's a positive. But as we move forward, we really have to look at the whole revamping of the games. Is it really worth it? Has it exceeded its objective in terms of having 80 young persons come together in one activity over a period of 10 days and have 5 sporting activities? And that is what the discussion was centered around. Yes, we have agreed that the games have been cancelled. Yes, we have agreed that the games will continue next year, God willing, with the new normal in Grenada. But we are still out in terms of how do we revamp the game to make sure it meets its objectives in terms of what do we do for our young persons. Is it time now for us to split the games and have separate sessions? Is it time for us to look at the age and move from under 20 to under 18? Is it time for us to have separate islands host separate activities at separate times within the year, so that one, we get a wider exposure for our young persons in country and out of country? So for example, if we have a volleyball tournament, we have a full volleyball team going out and not a makeshift volleyball team, and then you have more exposure for the sponsor, for example. So Windward Islands would get their fair share in terms of the sponsorship, the marketing of the game, of the games itself, and also of the product. So it really is very good for us in terms of taking back and looking at the games and causing us to think, take a deep thought into how we move forward in terms of planning for the 2021 games, where St. Lucia will still be the defending champion.
Yeah, I think one of the main drawbacks to that would be like students who are probably looking forward to the last year at that level, and persons who are thinking that they're in a very good position to make the national team going forward. I think they would be the ones that really would have felt it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we're going to close up in a short while, and we will just get final thoughts. First of all, Semi, we know you've not been in the ministry for that. You're relatively new, hasn't been really that long of a period. Maybe I want to use this closing few moments to tell us about the experience so far, and despite the fact that COVID-19 has brought such a challenge to you.
Well, I think the experience has been very, very worthwhile. For me, you know, it's a transition, you know, from accounting and finance to one of, you know, policy implementation. But if I had to choose one ministry where I made that transition, it had to be sports, because, you know, it comes naturally for me. You know, the transition came naturally, given my extensive involvement with sports, you know, over the years in various capacities. And, you know, the love and passion that you've developed, you know, during that time. So it's very, very enjoyable. I think, you know, I see it more as service than work. So it has been, you know, a very, very rewarding experience for me. In terms of the challenges of COVID-19, as you rightfully mentioned, it presents a challenge. But what it does, you know, in every challenge, there are opportunities. You know, it's more how you view and perceive, you know, what is presented before you. So we have tried as much as possible, you know, to explore the opportunities coming out, you know, of the pandemic, and to channel our energies and place our efforts, you know, on taking advantage of those opportunities rather than, you know, sobbing over, you know, what is not possible and so on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Emile. Ms. Wilfred, any closing comments for the youth of St. Lucia?
Oh yes, I want to commend our young people during this time of COVID-19 for their resilience, first of all, and for their innovation and continued. They're very spirited in what they are doing. So, say for example, you had students from the Babunu Secondary School putting up their own video on, you know, protocols for COVID, to wash your hands and the things that are needed. NYC still continue its 35 years, NYC at 35 years project. And they are reaching young people on those platforms where they are. So we want to continue to encourage young people to be resilient. I think at the end of it, it's going to serve us well. It's going to make us, you know, more. It's going to make us stronger. and it's going to give us a more positive outlook so that when things come our way, we'll be able to respond. So I want to encourage our young people to continue. We've seen the work of the Cadet Corps throughout NEMO, how they've helped in the delivery of, packages and other things. And young people are also in their communities helping to meet the needs of the elderly and to help in engage in serving food and other things in their community. So they're very involved in this time of NEMO, and I trust that this is, in this time of emergency, so I trust that this spirit will continue and it's going to make our nation stronger and better.
Mr. Matra, final word to you.
Well, Ryan, I want to say that as an athlete and as a sports personality, sometimes the rest is good because you get a chance to recover from your injuries and to retune your body. And I dare say that when we come out of this thing to new normal, that we would see some performances unprecedented by our sports personalities in St. Lucia. I know that they want to go, they're ready to go. It has taken some time and this is coming, and I dare say that our challenge for us now as a ministry when this thing comes back to normal is how do we contain all that potential that has been stored and is now being unleashed on the nation. We, St. Lucia, look for wondrous things to happen in sports. And I think that COVID, like the PISA said, we look at the opportunities, and I think the opportunities are ripe now for us to move forward and to show the world what St. Lucia is in terms of the sporting landscape.
Thank you, sir. We've come to the end of our midday update. We have with us in studio officials from the Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, including the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Benson Emile, the Director of Youth Development, Ms. Mary Wilfred, and the Director of Sports, Mr. Patrick Matthew. He's not necessarily a number 11 batsman, but he brought the innings to a close today. I'm Ryan O'Brien from the Ministry of Development and Sports. On behalf of everyone at the Ministry, we'd like to say thank you to the National Television Network for affording us this opportunity. Goodbye.
Well done.